KaijuCreamStick.
Welcome to KaijuCreamStick. Welcome back, I should say. This is the second broadcast. The first one, well, it's been a minute. 3 months, give or take, since that one. That introductory Halloween episode touched on monsters appropriately. I alluded to a favorite monster of mine, a comic book monster, which we'll delve into a bit further this time. On the topic of monsters, just monsters in general, all sorts come to mind.
Boris Karloff's monster. Frankenstein Jr., 1966, was preceded a decade earlier by Tetsujin 28, better known in America as Gigantor. One of my favorites, Johnny Sacco's Flying Robot, came about in 1967, while in 1995, Frank Miller and Jeff Darrow brought us Big Guy. Miller is known for revitalizing Daredevil and Batman, among a host of other works. "2019's Golden Child" is a typically sardonic commentary on Trump and MAGA stereotypes versus the superiority of progressivism. Miller's political views aside, the artwork is interesting. Jeff Darrow, on the other hand, is the visual master injecting uber life into Big Guy. His detail is unparalleled. He was also a concept artist for The Matrix. The Babadook, the Tall Man, the Bensons, B-movie monsters, classics, contemporaries, urban legends, and childhood nightmares. They come in all shapes and sizes. This guy wields fear and a knife, but my guy, fear burns at his touch. There's a long history of swamp, bog, lagoon-type creatures. They're everywhere.
Here's a quirky comic favorite I stumbled across as a kid. Atlas Comics, you know Atlas Comics, right? Atlas Comics Man Monster, with his nemesis, Hellblazer.
Paul Sanders, millionaire playboy, of course, has an encounter with a bacterial force, thus becoming the Man Monster. A direct precursor to Man-Thing, this bipedal muck mass debuted in December of 1942 in the unlikely Air Fighters. This time Jim Roberts has an unfortunate interaction with a chemical agent, a common vehicle of disaster. There were subsequent releases of Heap. Note his carrot-like proboscis. There was even a spoof of the character in 1953 in the lampooning Mad magazine. I encountered the 1973 reprint as a kid. My brother John would buy them now and then. The story was called Outer Sanctum. Mad would revisit superheroes time and time and time again. Speaking of superheroes, you may recognize this fella.
McFarlane was the golden child of the 90s for Marvel Comics. He made millions and millions of dollars for old Stan Lee drawing my favorite web spinner, Spider-Man. I read an interview once where his editor told him, "Stop drawing so many crazy webs." And McFarlane said, "And every time they told me to do that, I drew more." It's that kind of attitude that led him to split off later with a couple other Marvel artists to form Image, where he gave us Spawn, which he had hoped would become a household name like Spider-Man, but I don't think that's happening. Nevertheless, it's a pretty cool comic. It has its moments. But McFarlane also gave us the character we were talking about, a revision of the Heap. It wasn't just the comic book. He also, through McFarlane Toys, gave us one cool action figure. Can we see that? The Heap. Parts of toilets, all the good stuff. Definitely a departure from the original Heap, but 100% McFarlane. No discussion about swamp monsters would be complete without DC's contribution. Len Wein and Bernie Wrightson's Swamp Thing. This was a book I picked up as a little kid. I was drawn in by the cover. I've been a Bernie Wrightson fan ever since. He does really cool stuff. This happens to be a wraparound cover. This book has seen better days, but can you see that? Really fun. A couple other covers of his. Exaggeration. He just has a good time with the anatomy, and it makes really good style for when you're doing monsters. Whoops, that one just hit the ground. Well, they're only comic books, right?
As it turns out, Harry and Hermione weren't the only characters created on the subway. Alec Holland was a mass transit brainchild too. Interestingly, Len Wein, known mostly for his role in creating Swamp Thing alongside Bernie Wrightson, also wrote the second appearance of Man-Thing in Astonishing Tales 12 and 13. Wein also came up with the Man-Thing's Burning Touch. Whereas Swamp Thing debuted in July of 1971, Man-Thing preceded DC's Boy by 2 months in Savage Tales #1. Don't have one of these. Wish I did.
I do, however, have this guy. And like Bernie Wrightson's Swamp Thing, I saw this cover and it was love at first sight. This is a Frank Brunner cover. This is iconic Man-Thing. The 3 tendrils that hang down from his face, the dangly things, which harken back to the original Heap, although he only had one carrot-like proboscis nose. Man-Thing here has 3. Unfortunately, Brunner didn't do any of the interior work for this book because he was too busy working on another character, most of the time, Doctor Strange. So while he's illustrating Doctor Strange and his bad guys, Man-Thing got along with other artists. Man-Thing's an empathic creature. He feels. He's driven by primal sorts of things like sadness and anger, and most profoundly, fear.
Remember Dr. Abraham Erskine's project? Come to find out that Sallis subsequently gets involved, ex post facto, the results of which were not quite as Adonis. Just for fun, let's do a quick comparison between Marvel and DC's Swamp Dwellers. One by injection, one by explosion. Historically, Man-Thing is mute, but that makes interesting character development a daunting task. So more recently, various writers have given him a voice. Without any visible mouth, not sure how that works. In Dark Avengers 176, Satana explains that he speaks the rare universal language Excelsior with the typical exotic spelling. Similarly, Swamp Thing originally had a hard time making its body speak, but he eventually became quite verbose. Ted's gal, Ellen, betrayed him and got her face melted off as a reward, while Alex's wife, Linda, caught a bullet. Later, Holland hooks up with Abigail Arcane, but she doesn't fare so well either. We've touched on the burning thing, But retconning stupidity now says the burning is a chemical process. How does the fire happen? Bursting into flames is much cooler. Meanwhile, Swamp Thing has your basic elemental powers connected to the earth, and especially plant life. He's been known to occasionally sprout wings, and was even a Green Lantern for a minute. But who hasn't been? Guardian of the Nexus of all realities, Avatar of the Green. Korek, Jennifer Kale, Howard, and Dockham the Enchanter. A bizarre remix of The Wizard of Oz. You may remember Lee Thompson from more memorable roles. She's since moved on to other projects, as has Howard. Whereas Swamp Thing has had limited commercial success, unfortunate for its cool television series, Ted is poised to pull down some serious bling for old Walt's company. Each character has its pros and cons. Flipping a coin, I'll always go with heads.
So now we come to a couple of fairly serious losers, at least insofar as Man-Thing is concerned, in my opinion. There were these comics that came out in the 90s, and they were prequels to an upcoming movie, an upcoming Marvel film, as the cover of these books show. The writer and future director of the film is one Hans Rodionov. Now, the comics here, they weren't too bad, actually. Mostly due to the artwork of Kyle Hotz, H-O-T-Z. I never know how to pronounce these guys' names. You see them spelled differently online. H-O-T-Z, Kyle Hotz. But I like his work. He's kind of similar to Bernie Wright's in certain respects. So the comics weren't too bad. Again, because of the artwork. But then along came this masterpiece. Now, perhaps some of you have been unfortunate enough to see this, to waste your time. But this was just a train wreck. It was horrible. This was his vision of the so-called Man-Thing, and it was terrible. The most amazing thing about it, or the most memorable part about it, would have been in the first 5-10 minutes of the film, and it featured one Australian actress, Imogen Bailey. Again, the names thing, I'm so bad at that. As you can probably guess by the photograph, it wasn't really her dialogue that caught everyone's attention for those few minutes.
Here are some of Rodionov's other memorable films. Though the quasi-Man-Thing clay sculpt was admirable, the movie was just horrible. Horrible. Thankfully, the creature died with the film.
Our second loser is actually a name you've probably heard of, particularly if you've had children or you teach junior high or elementary. One R.L. Stine. And Marvel gave him a shot at Man-Thing. And I got through 2 of these issues, wasted my $8 or $10 or whatever, because these were just juvenile. I mean, that's the kindest word. And that makes sense, given that was the audience for Goosebumps and where he made all his money. I told you I only bought 2, and I did. This is a second issue just because of the cover. I think it's, John Tyler Christopher. He does these sort of action figure looking things, which are really, really cool. But insofar as the stories, the interior artwork was bad also. I'm a big fan of the artwork. It's mostly about the artwork, but the stories, the dialogue. I mean, he had no business. He had no business working on a Marvel comic, unless it would have been Deadpool. If only it would have been Deadpool. God.
If you have absolutely nothing better to do and you want to peruse a collection of the most idiotic comments ever, this is your comic series. Typical of the superhero marketing machine, Man-Thing appears not only in comics, but in other media as well.
So you may have noticed the peanut gallery in the back here, my little Man-Thing entourage. Most of these guys back here were a gift from a good friend of mine, Jerry, and his faithful sidekick, Trigger. The bobblehead Man-Thing, you have to have a bobblehead. Keychain, cell phone cover. Oh, and then we have the WWE Man-Thing with Carol Danvers, the omnipotent Carol Danvers, just about to burst into flames. I thought that was a wonderful touch. And on the far right, we have a Man-Thing that I made. He's carved from wood. And he was a hybrid of superheroes and ancient fertility icons, most notably the Venus of Willendorf, which is a prehistoric fertility idol. So of the 70-some figures that I created, both Marvel and DC-ish, I don't know, there might be half a dozen of them that are females, and that's what originally started. It was the Venus of Willendorf and the female figures. But the particularly the African fertility figures are quite well endowed. So if you were to look at a lot of my figures, some reflect that endowment, especially the Hulk, who we won't show at this time.
Despite my misgivings about who actually designed this Man-Thing, I wouldn't mind having a version or two of him. Gratis.
Speaking of figures and artwork, in 2000, Toy Biz released Marvel History Darkside, a 4-figure set that included Dormammu, Doctor Strange, Vermin, and of course, the Man-Thing.
This is the original Sasquatch in the 2-pack, which they then cheaply retooled into the dismal Darkseid Disappointment. In light of such a pathetic figure, these were the subsequent concept drawings that I did that I would send along with the figure that I would sculpt.
So this is the Man-Thing sculpture that I did way back in the very, very early 2000s in response to Toy Biz's Darkseid Man-Thing. And this is plastilina, which is an oil-based clay. It doesn't dry out, which has its perks, but it does tend to collect dust. Dust wants to stick to it. So you have to keep it covered with saran wrap or something of that sort. You can see maybe the dust collecting a little bit on his toes and his feet, although I have cleaned him up quite a bit. He looks sort of non-Man-Thing-like because of his iconic face is missing. You can see the 2 orbs of his eyes, but the tendrils are missing. Well, they're down here. They were part of the fatalities of the trip up from Florida when I came back. But so this would go here, and then I would attach the other pieces, the other top part of the brow. Boink. And then there are, other tendrils. So that needs to be reconstructed to really capture the essence of the Man-Thing. Those 3 tendrils, the tentacles, that just really makes him. Thanks to Frank Brunner, who made that iconic from that first comic book cover. So you can see I put a mangrove embedded into his back, the roots thereof. Up here there's a skull half embedded, which I'll show you a little bit more later. The anatomy is kind of Plug-like, exaggeration and really good definition. I like that sort of thing. You can see his radius and ulna. You can see right through his forearm. The fingers on this hand are fused except for the small finger here. And the Man-Thing, you can punch right through him. So he probably regenerates things. Say if his foot got ripped off, for example. He's the Man-Thing, so some slight distortions going on. Instead of growing back a foot, he grows back a hand down here. So as I turn this around a little bit, you can see the moss, and you can see weeds and such. And then Get a little further right here. You may not be able to see that too well. There's a snake head coming out of the thigh, and then it re-emerges lower and it wraps around the thigh. Whereas up higher, here nestled among the mangrove, a little frog is perched right there amongst the mangrove roots. We keep rotating, you see the mangroves better. And we see that skull half buried in him right there, the human skull. Boils and bumps and triceps, all that good stuff. Veins and vines. There's that skull. So photographs of this when it was fully done and pristine at the time. These are bad photographs, but he was complete. I sent those and other drawings and project proposals to Marvel. And at any rate, this was the guy that I did in response to that tragic half attempt at a Man-Thing back in 2000.
By 2004, they released a significantly upgraded figure, with a tree protruding from his back, and a swamp base with 2 stumps, and a frog. If that's not suspicious enough, in 2022, James Groman, Mondo, released his Man-Thing. A tree on its back, an embedded skull just below it, bifurcated forearms, a snake wrapped around its leg, clinging mushrooms, and in place of its right foot, remarkably hand-shaped tree roots. Things that make you go, Besides prototype action figures, I've also tried my hand at illustrating for Marvel and DC, with equal success. This was one of the submissions, I believe, that was one of my most favorites. It was heavily influenced at the time by Hellboy's Mike Mignola.
I keep talking about the artwork and how I love the artwork, and that's really what it boils down to for me. In the comic book world, if the art's good, I'll buy it. Preferably it's a character I love or like a lot, like Man-Thing. But if the right artist gets on Lobo or Deadpool or a bunch of other characters I don't care for, I'll still get the book if the artwork is good. If the story's good, that's a bonus. I can appreciate the labor that goes into writing, like so many others. I've written some screenplays, and I know what the discipline of writing is, and to craft a good story. But at the end of the day, for me to pull out, what, $5 now per comic, the artwork has to be good, or it's just not a sale. Even if it's a Man-Thing comic or another favorite of mine, I don't know, Green Lantern or Dr. Fate, or what have you. Even if I like the characters but the interior artwork is bad, nope. I'll put my wallet back in my pocket. So I've talked about Bernie Wrightson's work on Swamp Thing and Frank Brunner's work on the first cover of Man-Thing. So I thought I'd show a couple other covers and artists who I really, really like. Early on, Mike Ploog was the guy that did a lot of the artwork, the covers, and the interior. This guy just has an excellent synthesis of humor, intentional or otherwise, and horror, I guess. And he worked on Man-Thing for quite a number of issues, and I enjoy his work every time I open the books. Let's see, yeah, there's a Ploog. And another of my favorite artists, This guy did a lot of work on the original Captain Marvel. The only one that matters, really, in my humble opinion. That was Gil Kane. And I'm not even sure what adjectives to use to describe his work. He had really cool anatomy. Took some liberties with things, but it always worked. And he had certain sort of telltale signs of a Gil Kane. The wrists were always like, I don't even think I can do like what he does with the wrists. But he just did fun stuff. And thankfully he did some of that fun stuff for Man-Thing. Oh, here are those wrists I was talking about. Check out the wrists. That weird bend. The fingers all, bend different directions. Yeah, you just gotta love Gil Kane. Oh, and here's our buddy Shang-Chi. Now he's missing his coat, but this is not Gil Kane, but there's Man-Thing fighting Shang-Chi there in his full attire, his 70s attire, which, being the old guard, that's what I prefer. I didn't care for the Shang-Chi of the movie. And I would love to see them put him in that outfit, the long hair and all that stuff, or someone like him. I don't know. Of course they won't, but one can always hope. I don't know who this artist was, but this cover sold me. The interior artwork's not so exciting, but the cover, they did a bunch of covers. It was a Man-Thing 50th anniversary. So they did him like Spider-Man and so many other characters, just a hybrid. That was the Iron Man thing. And we even had Greg Land, who's usually like a good girl artist type of thing, who works directly from like Vogue magazine and things like that. But hey, he did a nice job with Man-Thing here. You can't argue with that. I doubt he got his model reference out of Vogue for that. This cover, the artwork's not bad, But the thing I really liked about it was the size of the Man-Thing. Now that's what I'm talking about. The Man-Thing should be big. I mean, he's maybe overly big here, but the Man-Thing should be big. Like the Hulk. I mean, no one should be near the size of the Hulk, in my opinion. But this is a nice, big Man-Thing. And I love the tendrils on his face. Again, I'm not quite sure who the artist is. Maybe Acuna. I'm not sure. But nicely done. There was a very short series called The Dead of Night. And it was a max output series. And you'll note that it says explicit content. There's a good reason for that, because there's gratuitous violence and Jennifer Kale TNA. But again, the covers were pretty cool. The interior artwork had a certain style that was kind of rough, but I like that. And I didn't finish getting this series. Somehow I missed them, so I still have to get the other 2 or 3 issues of this, because it was it was fun. Finally, I think in 2019, this little puppy came out, Monsters. And the interesting thing about it has a couple of stories at the beginning and the end, but that's not the interesting part. The interesting part is this. The anatomy of the monstrous. And in here they have a bunch of kaiju and different things, and they've drawn them, well, interestingly, from a medical illustrator's point of view, which is one of the degrees that I have, master's degree. And here we have good old Man-Thing in all his semi-dissected glory. Sort of a whimsical approach of this is how he might function. So artwork was key for me. It still is. The looks of things, the visuals. I could go on and on, maybe in another broadcast about the MCU and how they take liberties with changing their characters' designs and all of that. I mean, many people have talked about that. But, yeah, visuals are king. Thanks for being with me, a little journey into mystery, the mystery of the Man-Thing. But before we go, I really have to recommend these 2 books. This is back issue number 124. and it is chock full of really good information about the Man-Thing. And also this big mama, the Man-Thing Omnibus. Look at that thing. It's bigger than my head. But this contains all or most of the Man-Thing stories, including the first appearance, which was in Savage Tales #1. So that Back Issues magazine and the Man-Thing Omnibus, excellent resources if you like the Man-Thing like I do. So until next time, ladies and gentlemen, keep your cream sticks nearby, keep Kaiju Cream Stick in mind, wait for our next broadcast, and have a little fun. Enjoy some artwork. Cream sticks. You can't beat them with a stick. So I thought I had a wrap on this, and I woke up this morning and bolt upright and said, "Ah, you forgot something very important." If this program has been so interesting and so motivating that you want to grab your Crayolas or maybe your Play-Doh and draw your very own Man-Thing or sculpt your very own Man-Thing, look at this guy right here. This was a labor of love. Huh? Look at that. Go ahead and send your pieces to KaijuCreamStick@gmail.com.